The conference room on the 14th floor of Pace Industries had no windows, and no one would have noticed the time had hit 11:52 p.m. if the cleaning crew hadn't stopped rattling their cart outside the frosted glass door. Inside, Camille Baxter was still at the table. She was the only one. The other two junior accountants had left hours ago. She had told them to go herself, had said she could finish the quarterly variance report, had smiled like it wasn't a problem. She had been saying that for 3 years. It had never once stopped being a problem. The audit files were spread across 6 feet of table. Her laptop screen showed 3 open spreadsheets. A half-eaten granola bar sat at the edge of her keyboard. She had been meaning to finish it since 9. Her pen scratched a note in the margin of a printed ledger. Then it stopped. The pen fell. Camille's head dropped forward onto the table, one arm sweeping the granola bar to the floor, and she didn't move. The cleaning cart rattled past again. Then, a different sound, the freight elevator opening, heavy footsteps in the hallway, a voice asking a security guard something low and precise, the kind of voice that didn't repeat itself. The frosted glass door opened. Griffin Pace stood in the doorway for exactly 1 second before he crossed the room. He had been in the building late for a call with associates in Baton Rouge. His driver was waiting in the garage. He had passed the 14th floor on the way down, only because Helena had mentioned, offhandedly, that the accounting team was still running the Q3 variance. Just an observation. Helena always framed her concerns as observations. He had glanced through the glass. Now he crouched beside the chair where Camille Baxter had slumped forward, 2 fingers pressed to her neck, and felt a pulse that was there but wrong, thin, faster than it should have been. He straightened and looked at the table, at the 6 feet of audit files, at the half-eaten granola bar on the floor, at the 3 open spreadsheets on her laptop, all of them nearly complete. He reached into his jacket pocket. His driver answered before the first ring finished. "Bring the car to the lobby entrance now." Then he gathered Camille's weight against his shoulder, with the particular kind of careful that most men his size forgot they were capable of, and he walked her out of the conference room himself. The emergency department at Tulane Medical Center was not accustomed to a black Escalade, pulling directly to the entrance at midnight, with a man in a charcoal suit carrying a woman through the sliding doors. It was not accustomed to the quiet way that man described her symptoms. Unconscious, rapid pulse, hadn't eaten properly in what he estimated were many hours, had been working for the better part of 2 days, in the same tone other people used to describe weather. Calm, certain, expecting to be taken seriously. They took her seriously. The attending physician was a woman named Dr. Pellerin, who had a measured voice and the habit of looking directly at whoever she was speaking to. She looked at Griffin Pace directly now. Severe hypoglycemia, compounded by acute dehydration. Her blood pressure when she came in was low enough that we're monitoring for cardiac stress. A pause. How long had she been working before tonight? Griffin did not look away. "I intend to find out." Dr. Pellerin studied him for a moment. "She's stable. We'll know more in a few hours." He nodded once and walked to the chair nearest the hallway wall and sat down. His phone vibrated. The Shanghai call. He silenced it. His assistant, Tobias, texted 12 minutes later. "The Beaumont meeting is confirmed for 8 a.m. Should I push it?" Griffin typed back, "Cancel it. The Shanghai investors are on a tight window. They leave Thursday. Cancel everything Thursday." A pause on the other end, then understood. He put the phone face down on his knee and looked at the hallway where Camille Baxter was being stabilized. And he waited. By 4 in the morning, the doctor had stepped out twice to update him. Stable, improving, dehydrated in the way that built over days, not hours. "Another 12 hours at that pace," Dr. Pellerin said on the second visit, her voice careful, and we might be having a more serious conversation. Griffin was quiet for a moment. Thank you. She watched him for a beat. Is she family? He considered the question longer than it warranted. She works for me. Dr. Pellerin nodded and went back inside. Griffin remained in the chair. He had negotiated contracts in rooms where men kept guns under the table. He had watched buildings he owned get condemned and rebuilt without flinching. He had inherited an empire at 31 and learned to make every decision from a place of absolute certainty, because uncertainty was expensive, and men who showed it didn't last. He had not felt uncertain about anything in a very long time. He felt it now, sitting in a hospital hallway at 4 in the morning, waiting to hear if a woman he had never looked at closely enough was going to be all right. By sunrise, he had made 7 calls and kept none of the appointments they were meant to address. At 8:15, Helena Sainty arrived. She was 38, efficient in the way water was efficient. She found the fastest route without being told. She handed him a coffee and sat down without being asked. I pulled her work records last night, Helena said, not looking at him. When you texted from the car. He waited. She has logged overtime in 41 of the past 52 weeks. The 2 weeks she didn't. One was after her brother's surgery in February. The other was Thanksgiving, and she came in the following Saturday to make up for it. Griffin set the coffee down. Who authorized that volume? Technically, no one. She volunteered for most of it. Covered other people's deadlines when they were sick, when they had family conflicts. Helena paused. Diane Lords's department ran on Camille's extra hours and apparently never saw a reason to redistribute the workload. Get me Diane's full management record. Already on your desk. A nurse stepped out of Camille's room and looked toward Griffin. Mr. Pace, she's awake. The room was quiet and very pale. Camille Baxter lay with an IV in her left arm and a blood pressure cuff loose around her right, and her first expression when she saw Griffin Pace standing in the doorway was one he hadn't expected. Not relief, not confusion. Embarrassment. I'm so sorry. Her voice was rough. The Q3 variants. I was almost finished. I just need to. Camille. She stopped. He stepped into the room and stood near the foot of the bed, where she could see him without turning her head. You apologized before you asked for water, before you asked what happened, before you asked what time it is. She blinked. That tells me something important. He pulled the chair closer to the bedside and sat. Drink the water first. She reached for the plastic cup on the tray table. Her hand shook slightly, and without thinking she braced her other hand against the side of the bed, fingers searching for something steady, and found his forearm instead, resting along the rail. She held on for exactly 3 seconds before she realized what she was doing. The blush that spread across her face was immediate and total. I'm sorry, I didn't. Don't. His voice was quiet. He didn't move his arm. Drink. She drank. Neither of them mentioned the 3 seconds again. Outside the glass partition, Helena Saint watched and said nothing. She had worked for Griffin Pace for 9 years. She had seen him close a $12 million deal while eating a gas station sandwich and not blink, but she had never once seen him look at anyone the way he was looking at the woman in that bed. She went back to the hallway, sat down, and smiled at the middle distance. The staff meeting convened in Griffin's private office 2 days later. Archie Taft, who had been CFO for Pace Industries longer than most of the junior staff had been alive, sat with his hands folded on the table. Diane Lord sat across from him with the posture of someone expecting a compliment. 3 department heads arranged themselves along the wall. Griffin set a folder on the table and opened it. 53 hours. He turned a page. That's what the badge records show, for the 72 hours before she collapsed. 53 hours in the building. The other 19, according to her personal laptop's remote access log, she was logged into the company server from home. No one spoke. Explain the workload distribution. Diane Lord cleared her throat. Camille is very dedicated. She preferred to handle the high priority. She preferred. Griffin looked up. The room went still in the way. Rooms went still when he was deciding something. She preferred to work herself into a hospital bed. She volunteered every time. Archie Taft made a small sound and looked at his hands. Griffin turned to him. Archie. The old man sighed. She volunteered because she knew if she didn't do it, it wouldn't get done, and she cared too much about the work to let it not get done. He was quiet a moment. That's not the same as choosing to. The room held that distinction in silence. Then one of the junior department heads, a young woman who had been with the company 18 months, spoke very quietly. She covered my audit when my daughter was in the ER last spring. I offered to come back, and she told me to stay with my kid. She swallowed. I didn't know she was already working a double. Another voice. The head of hospitality accounts, a man in his 50s, who had the look of someone who had been carrying guilt for a while. She found a discrepancy in the Delacroix contract renewal 14 months ago, caught what turned out to be an embezzlement scheme running through a vendor account, flagged it through internal channels, quietly. The vendor was terminated, the funds were recovered. He hesitated. I don't think anyone told you directly. It was handled as a routine audit finding. Griffin was very still. How much? $840,000. The room was completely silent. Griffin looked at the file, then at the window, then back at Archie Taft. The Monday market briefs, the ones with the color-coded risk tiers. I assumed those came from the research team. Archie almost smiled. They came from Camille. She started sending them about 18 months ago. She noticed you weren't reading the full research reports. Too much jargon, she said. So she started condensing them into plain language with visual flags. He paused. She never signed them. She just left them outside your office every Monday morning. Griffin said nothing. Diane Lord shifted in her chair. I wasn't aware of the market briefs. No, Griffin said. You weren't aware of quite a lot. He went back to the hospital that afternoon. Camille was sitting up, which was progress. She had managed to eat actual food, which Dr. Pellerin described as a victory not to be underestimated. She had also somehow gotten hold of a notepad and was writing figures in the margin. Griffin looked at the notepad. He looked at her. She had the grace to look sheepish. It's just a reconciliation I was running in my head, she said. I can't sleep if I leave a number open. Your doctor is going to take that notepad. She already tried. Camille set it on the blanket. I told her it was therapeutic. He almost smiled. It was a near thing, a shift at the corner of his mouth that lasted less than a second. How long have you been doing the Monday briefs? She went still. 18 months, she said carefully, give or take. Why? She looked down at the notepad. The full research reports were 40 pages. I watched you skim the executive summaries and stop reading at the second section for about 2 months before I figured the format wasn't working. She shrugged one shoulder, a small motion that tried to seem casual and didn't quite manage it, so I reformatted them. For me specifically. You're the one making the decisions. She said it simply, like it was obvious. The reports should serve the decision maker, not the other way around. He sat down in the same chair as before. It had developed a shape that was, he was starting to think, specifically his. I also want to know, he said, about your brother. She looked up. Dean, he said. 3rd spinal surgery, February. You came back to work the following Monday. He watched her face. The medical bills are approximately what you earn in 7 months. The extra freelance work you've been picking up nights. 3 separate small businesses. I have their tax IDs. Covers about half of the monthly payment plan. Camille was quiet for a long moment. I wasn't going to ask for help, she said finally. I know. That's not. She stopped. Started again. I've been in this industry for 9 years. I know what happens when people see a plus-size woman asking for accommodations, or flexibility, or assistance. She said the words like she had rehearsed them for a long time, and finally stopped needing to. They start wondering if she can really handle the job, or if she's going to be a liability. She looked at the window. I decided early on that the only way through was to be invisible. Do the work. Don't ask for anything. Don't give anyone a reason to look too closely. Griffin let her finish. There was a senior partner at my last firm, she said, quieter now. I presented a quarterly analysis to a major client. Came in, put up the numbers, walked them through the findings. Good numbers. Solid presentation. The client asked my partner afterward. She paused. He told the client, "The analysis is excellent, but you'd find the delivery more compelling if the person presenting looked more like someone who counted calories instead of spreadsheets." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. My partner didn't correct him. He laughed. The room was very quiet. I gave my notice the same afternoon, she said. I came here. I decided the only version of invisible I could live with was the version where the work was so good that no one could afford to look past it. Griffin didn't speak immediately. When he did, his voice was measured and precise, in the way that meant he was choosing each word deliberately. You caught an embezzlement scheme that would have cost this company nearly $1 million, he said. You have been producing the most useful financial intelligence I receive every week for 1.5 years. You have covered this department's shortfall so consistently that the shortfalls became invisible because you absorbed them. He met her eyes. The most valuable person on my financial team has been operating under the assumption that she needed to disappear in order to survive. Camille looked at him. Something in her face shifted. The particular tension of someone who had braced for something painful and received something else entirely. That ends, Griffin said, starting now. He did not ask her to the foundation dinner. Helena did, and she framed it as a request, which was different. You've spent 3 years contributing to the work this event celebrates, Helena told her, over coffee 2 weeks after Camille's discharge. It would be appropriate for you to be there. Camille came. She wore a burgundy dress she had bought 3 years ago for a work event she'd ended up skipping, and she had the look of someone who has decided to be somewhere and is quietly reconsidering. The ballroom of the Dumont Hotel was full of people who wore their money visibly. Camille carried hers in a spreadsheet she had memorized. She was near the bar, trying to determine the least conspicuous exit trajectory, when Diane Lords found her. The termination proceedings had been underway for 2 weeks. Diane was still technically an employee until the board finalized its decision, which meant she was still technically able to attend the dinner, which she had clearly decided was an opportunity. Camille. She said the name like it tasted of something she wanted to spit out. I didn't expect to see you here. Good evening, Diane. Feeling better, I hope. Her voice carried. The people nearby adjusted their conversations to lower volume without visibly doing so. Though I have to say, the timing of everything was quite something. 3 years of being perfectly fine, and then a collapse right when Griffin Pace happened to be in the building. She tilted her head. Almost poetic. Camille's chin stayed level. I'm not sure what you mean. I only mean, some people have a gift for creating the right impression at the right moment. Diane smiled pleasantly. It's not a skill set I'd typically associate with accounting. A few people nearby had stopped pretending to have other conversations. I was unconscious, Camille said evenly. I don't generally stage my medical emergencies. Of course not. Diane's hand moved, a gesture that looked like she was adjusting her clutch. That was in fact calculated, and her shoulder connected with Camille's with enough force to throw her sideways. Camille's heel caught the edge of a floor seam. She pitched toward the marble. She didn't fall. A hand caught her at the waist, firm and immediate, and another steadied her shoulder with a care that was entirely at odds with the speed at which it had arrived. She opened her eyes. Griffin. He had been across the room. He was here now. He looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize, the particular stillness of a man deciding something. Are you hurt? No. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned to face the room, and the room understood without being told to pay attention. Mrs. Lords. His voice was completely calm. The calm was the point. You suggested Miss Baxter fabricated her medical collapse for personal advantage. Diane's confidence contracted visibly. I only meant. In the 18 months before she was hospitalized, Camille Baxter identified and flagged an embezzlement scheme that recovered $840,000 from this company's vendor accounts. She produced weekly financial analysis that informed every major acquisition decision my team made during that period. She covered approximately 400 hours of departmental overtime that would otherwise have gone unfilled. He let that settle over the room. She did all of this without requesting recognition, credit, or compensation beyond her standard salary. The ballroom had gone completely quiet. A photographer near the stage had his camera up. She also, Griffin continued, and something in his voice changed slightly, became less like a statement and more like something private being said in a room full of people, worked a second job at night for 14 months to pay for her younger brother's surgery, while managing a full workload here without asking for help. Camille felt her throat tighten. She was not going to cry in the Dumont Hotel ballroom. She was absolutely not. Griffin looked at Diane Lord directly. You managed a department that ran on this woman's labor for 3 years and never once noticed the weight she was carrying. I'm not certain that qualifies you to comment on her character. Diane said nothing. There was nothing to say. He turned back to the room, to the business people and philanthropists and journalists who had been watching in complete silence, and he spoke clearly. The Pace Foundation exists to support people who do the work that holds things together while others take credit for the result. Tonight, I would like everyone in this room to understand that the woman standing next to me is the reason our financial division is as strong as it is, and going forward. His eyes moved briefly to where Diane was now looking at the floor. No one in our organization will mistake silence for satisfaction again. The applause started at the back of the room and moved forward like a tide. Camille looked at her hands. She had spent 9 years making herself invisible. She had gotten extremely good at it. She had no idea what to do with 200 people standing up. Griffin turned to her. Just to her, the way she had noticed, he turned to things he was deciding to keep. Don't apologize, he said quietly. She laughed. It came out watery and real, and she didn't try to fix it. He offered his hand. She took it. Diane Lords's termination was effective within the week. The internal review documented 3 years of workflow mismanagement and a pattern of credit appropriation that went beyond Camille's case alone. When security walked Diane out of the building on a Thursday afternoon, she looked back only once at the offices she had run for 6 years. And she understood something she had never understood before. A company could replace talent. It could recover lost revenue. But once people stopped trusting that they were valued, it took years to rebuild. By the following month, Pace Industries had implemented the most comprehensive employee overhaul in its history. Mandatory overtime caps, an anonymous reporting mechanism for workload abuse, a caregiver assistance fund for employees managing family medical expenses, quarterly check-ins between managers and their full staff. Not about productivity, about people. Every proposal went through Griffin's office. Everyone came back with handwritten notes in the margins. Reduce maximum consecutive hours. No employee should require hospitalization before their workload is reviewed. Managers are responsible for noticing before the crisis, not after. The board understood without being told where the policies had begun. None of them had been written in a conference room. Camille came back to work on a Tuesday, which she chose deliberately because Tuesdays were quieter than Mondays, and she didn't want to fuss. She walked into the accounting department at 8:15 and found her desk had been moved to the window office she'd always assumed was reserved for someone more important. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she put her bag down and started setting up her computer. At 8:45, Griffin appeared in the doorway. She had not heard him coming. She was not sure how a man his size moved that quietly. Your schedule for the next month has mandatory lunch hours, he said. Non-negotiable. She turned her chair to face him. I don't always need a full. Non-negotiable, Camille. She pressed her mouth together. I have never in my life had a boss who argued with me about working too much. I have never had an employee who treated collapsing as a scheduling problem. He held her gaze. The lunch hour stay. She looked at him for a long moment, then fine. It didn't sound like fine. It sounded like someone losing an argument gracefully and being oddly okay with it. He almost smiled again. It lasted longer this time. 6 weeks after that, she was in the archive room on the 12th floor, recataloguing 3 years of vendor contracts into the new system she'd designed. A project she had volunteered for, because she found the work genuinely satisfying, and also because the archive room was the quietest place in the building. He found her there at 7 in the evening. She was cross-referencing 2 binders and did not hear him come in. Your brother's follow-up appointment, he said. How did it go? She looked up. He was leaning against the doorframe with the ease of a man who had decided to be somewhere and was comfortable about it. She had noticed, over the past few weeks, that he had started doing that, appearing in the same rooms she was in, without urgency, without an obvious reason. Really well, she said. Dr. Pham said his mobility is ahead of schedule. She paused. He wants to go back to work in September. Good. The Caregiver Assistance Fund. She stopped, started again. Dean got approved for the supplemental. I didn't know it applied retroactively. It does now. She looked down at the binders. There was something she had been carrying for a long time, and it was lighter than it used to be. And she was still getting used to the difference. Can I ask you something? She said. He waited. Why me? She said it flatly, like a fact being checked. There are women who fit this world, who move through it easily, who went to the right schools and know the right people and don't have to work 3 times as hard just to be taken at face value. She met his eyes. I'm the person who keeps the books for this world. I'm not part of it. He was quiet long enough that she almost wished she hadn't asked. You reformatted 40-page reports into documents a decision-maker could actually use, he said. Because you noticed I'd stopped reading past page 3 and decided that was a systems problem rather than my problem. He pushed off the doorframe and took 2 steps into the room. You color-coded risk tiers so I could make faster calls under time pressure. You caught a fraud scheme and reported it quietly because you cared more about protecting the company than about getting credit for it. You sent me a brief every Monday morning for 18 months and signed it from a team that had nothing to do with it. She was listening very carefully. I have spent 14 years in a position where everyone around me is trying to anticipate what I want so they can give it to me, he said. You were the only person in this building who was just trying to make the work better. For its own sake. A pause. You taught me to make better decisions without ever letting me notice I was being taught. She felt the particular stillness that arrived when something you'd been braced against turned out not to be a blow. In a building full of people paid to manage my perception, he said. You were just honest. He was close enough now that she would have had to lean back to look at him, so she didn't. She tilted her chin up instead. That is not a small thing. That is an extremely rare thing. A tear escaped before she could decide not to let it. She didn't apologize for it. He reached out slowly, and he didn't wipe it away. He simply let his hand rest near her face, an offer, a question. She closed the distance herself, and his palm curved against her jaw with a care that she had not known. Until this moment, she had been waiting for. I fell in love with the most honest person in a dishonest world, he said, quiet enough that it belonged only to the two of them, and the archive room, and the 7 o'clock light coming through the small high window. That's why. She put her hand over his. Neither of them let go. 8 months later, the Greater New Orleans Business Council held its annual economic summit, and Camille Baxter, Director of Financial Integrity at Pace Industries, a title that had surprised most of the industry and none of the people who actually worked with her, was invited to speak on internal accountability systems. She stood at the podium in a green dress and told a room of 300 people how to build a workplace where employees didn't have to choose between their health and their value to the organization. She said it plainly, without hedging, in the direct and specific language that had always been her best professional attribute. When she got to the part about anonymous reporting mechanisms, she cited the Pace Industries model because it was the best she knew. She did not mention that she had designed it herself. She never did. Afterward, when the applause had faded and the other panelists were talking to journalists and city officials, Griffin walked across the room. Not to the investors, not to the press, not to the foundation board members who wanted his ear. To her. He stopped in front of her, and she looked up at him the way she had, with full attention, without performance, without anything between her face and what she actually felt. He took her hand. A photographer 3 feet away caught the shutter. The next morning, the image would run in the business section. The CEO of Pace Industries and his Director of Financial Integrity, hands joined without apology or explanation, in a room that had no idea how long it had taken them to get there. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, she laced her fingers through his, and he closed his hand around hers. And in a city built on secrets kept in beautiful rooms, the two of them stood in the light and held on.